Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest. He is Mr. Ben Leman, who is all the way calling for us all the way from Texas. He's a businessman, rancher, fourth generation Texan with an appetite for adventure, which sounds fantastic. I'm dying to chat to you, Ben. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it. Look forward to the discussion.
Oh, well, we are delighted to have you. How is the weather down in Texas right now?
It's nice. It's beautiful. We're not too cold. We're not too hot. It's the sweet spot in Texas, and the weather, with respect to the weather, which lasts about 3 weeks, and then summer will be here.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Ben. Of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thanks, Roland. Thanks for joining us, Ben. So, every once in a while, we do like to check in with newer authors to sort of get their experience. It's always different for everybody, right? And depending on where you come from, what your background is, how much research you've done, how, there's so many factors that go into it. And since everyone's experience is so different, it's always useful to hear what other people have gone through so that, you can draw those parallels and be like, hey, I'm not the only one who's had this thing. So that's why, we wanted to talk to you today, because we want to get sort of your perspective. So why don't you start us off, though, by telling us how you got started with writing, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure, you bet. Basically, the story of how I got started with writing is a very, personal story. I was at the deathbed of my friend, one of my best friends, who was going in and out of conscious. This was in 2013. And we had a conversation. It was our last conversation. It was clear that it was going to be our last conversation. And as he was fading out of consciousness, in and out, it was time for me to go. And I remember, I'll never forget it. I'm walking out of his bedroom door after seeing him for the last time. And all of a sudden he shouts at me. He comes to and he shouts at me, and didn't understand what he said really at first. And I went back to him, and I went back to his bedside, and he was dying of pancreatic cancer. That's what he had. And he came to really alert, very alert, and looked me in the eyes, and he said, "Between the times, Ben, between the times." And I looked at him. I had never had a discussion about this before. And I said, "What do you mean, John? I don't understand what you're talking about." And he said, "Between the times, that's what you're going to call your first book." So, I committed to myself right then that I would write at least one novel, one book. Didn't know at the time what it was. But I set out on my journey to figure that out over time. So that was in 2013. That's how I actually got the idea of writing a book.
It's interesting. So your friend didn't know that you were, or like you and him hadn't discussed you writing a book at all. He just said, "You're going to write a book called this."
We had never discussed it at all. He was a mentor of mine as well as a good friend. We had been in business together to a large degree for a portion of time. And we were just close friends. And I remember his wife, when I knocked on the door, she didn't know if it was going to be a good day or a bad day, and that he had. And she smiled and told me it was a good day. So I was thankful for that last conversation. But that's what planted the seed. And we had never talked about it before.
I was very interested in you, but you can probably tell by the red hair, I'm originally Scottish, and I'm come from Clan MacDonald, and of course they too were enemies of Clan Campbell, who were dirty, disgusting turncoats who served for the English.
Right. Well, Clan MacDonald, they're a big part of this story. It's a big part of this story. I think you're going to enjoy that read. I can promise you that. So yeah.
Now on your website it says pre-order. So you haven't released it yet?
It's not released yet. April 28th is when we release it. Yes, sir.
So take us through the process. So this is back in 2013. So at that point you decided, okay, here we are, 13 years later. How long did it take you to I guess, decide to write the book, then to write the book, and then I guess what was the process after that?
Yeah, no, so at the time when he wrote the book, when we had that conversation, I mean, he said that to me, and my immediate response was, well, first, thank you, John, for saddling that objective on top of everything else I have. I was president and CEO of a company, very, very busy, a rancher, a family man, just a lot going on that took up a lot of time. And so I knew right away I couldn't do it right then. So I really focused on just thinking about what kind of options were out there. And one story, this story that I ended up writing about, immediately was one of the first things that came to my attention. I didn't know how I wanted to approach it. I didn't know what the goals were with writing this novel, what I really wanted a reader to learn from this historical fiction novel. But I knew right then this was an amazing story, because I had already done some research on this particular time period for Clan Lament history. And so I was, in fact, I started my research on it in 2015. I took my wife and kids over to Scotland. We drove all over Cal Peninsula, went to see a lot of these historical sites that are in my novel, which has a tremendous amount of actual historical events that occurred, and I know I'm not trying to get into the details of the novel, but the process of how I arrived at writing the story started off with research. It really took me on an adventure and a path through what happened in history. And it evolved into much deeper than that, not just what happened, but why it happened. Why did these events happen? What kind of historical materials out there that documented all these different events? And I found there were two things. You can find plenty of evidence of the actual events, but the evidence for the motivations for those events, why people did what they did, it's not as readily available. There's a lot of dots that have to be connected based off of piecing different aspects of that history together.
And it's incredible history. So you must have had an interest in, obviously, in Scottish history before that. But was it a kind of a story you had to discover for yourself before you could actually write it down?
Well, it started actually because my ancestors, are from Scotland. And so a big part of my family heredity is from Scotland. And so we have some family history there that my ancestors came from Scotland. And through that research initially, that's how I initially discovered some of these events, which then when you combine that with the desire to write a book, when I kind of put those two together and started my actual research and digging deeper and farther and wider on all this, it was just like a bunch of roots in a tree underground. It splintered off in so many different directions, and it connected to so many different things that just brought in this amazing story that has never been told before. I discovered it had never really been told in a visceral sort of way. I mean, you can find historical, aspects about these events, but finding that gem of a story is what I set out to do initially. I wanted to find something meaningful that impacts this world, and I have a lot of broader concepts that go underneath this story that are flowing in the undertow of this story, or in the undercurrent of what you're reading, that really tries to push the reader to dig deeper in their thought process of interpreting what they're reading.
Now, how did you make it a story rather than just like a history book?
Right. That's a great point. Well, it wasn't. Great question. It was not easy. I failed the first two times I wrote the story, in my opinion. I fell short. And so I literally rewrote this story two times. from beginning to end. And this is a full-length novel. Now, that doesn't mean I totally cut out every part of the first draft. I kept some components, but my personalities changed of the characters, like, from the end result, from the first result to the end result, they're completely different. And how I approach telling this story. And I think that's one of the lessons I learned. And it's not just from this, but it's how part of my background with my business or the other aspects of my life where I have been successful is just being honest with yourself. Being able to step outside of your creation and look back in objectively and say, I just didn't get there. This is not the best foot forward, and I need to redo this. So, 140,000 word novels, it's a lot to rewrite, and it's a big pill to swallow when you have to start that over and begin again. So being honest with yourself and having those around you that will help you be honest with yourself in every aspect of your life is critical for me. It was critical for me to coming up with this story.
That shows an awful lot of self-awareness. I was going to say, a lot of people are like, oh, I read books, I can write a book, that's easy. But actually, it's not quite as easy as that, is it? But then again, you seem to be the kind of person who has to figure, like, you were in the oil and gas business, you run a ranch, you've been in service to your community. So I guess you have to learn these things. So I guess you had that same approach to writing. But does that mean you planned things out? Do you follow any kind of like story format, like a story circle or the hero's journey or something?
No, I did not do anything based on some type of template or anything like that. What I did was, first thing I did was apply, like you mentioned, I applied how I've led my whole life, surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me, that know more about things than I do. And I listened to their advice and try to process that. So that was part of being honest with yourself, like you said. But then writing the story was first doing the research. I needed to find the dots, and then connect the dots. I needed to find the base historical sequence of events that happened. So, for example, all the battles in my story actually happened in real life, except for one. Well, only one of them, the initial one that I used which was reflective of the times, but I used it to get people drawn in. I needed to create something to draw them in from the get-go, while building the base of the story. So, so now I had those events, but then I also found a lot of other historical references to events, or not necessarily like battles, but different, the candy in the story that really sweetens it up. I found little tidbits of events here and there in historical research that helped me start to understand various motivations that could have occurred for these events that happened. And so you're going to find in research, I did a lot of different motivations potentially that could have existed for any given event, right? It's just when you get into motivations, unless it's a primary source, a lot of times it's somebody's opinion based off of their research, right? And so you find various opinions and you can say, oh, well, I could see how that could be possible, or I could see how this could be possible. So through my research, I pieced together what the motivations were that I thought were most likely or most likely possible for why they did certain things they did. And then from there, I tried to add the color, get the fine tooth paintbrush out and fill in all the details and the entertainment side of it and the personalities that really fit the story. And that's where molding that clay really got difficult.
I can imagine, because you said it's 140 words, it's 140,000 words. Yeah, which is, I mean, that takes quite a lot of time to write and to read. And you said that you did multiple. I mean, multiple takes on it. That's quite a commitment.
Yes, yeah, and that's the right way to do it, though. I'm glad that you did that, right? Because a lot of people, especially when they're first writing, they write their book and then they hit publish, right? You have to. Most authors will do a rewrite, at least one rewrite, a heavy one, because that first time when you're writing it, we often talk about this on the podcast, is like your first pass is like you telling yourself the story, and then the second pass is where you clean it up and tell and put it in a state where you're now able to tell it to somebody else, because now you understand how it all works and you can fix it.
Absolutely. I feel like and maybe different authors are going to be different ways. Everybody has different talents, about this. And so trying to weave, so first finding the skeleton story, the historical events, and then figuring out some various motivations, developing that tale that I'm talking about, right? The entertainment side, all the finer details that really make it a good story, but then incorporating the underlying themes that I'm trying to get across to the reader, that I want them to take away, the main takeaways from this story. It involved, as that evolved throughout writing the novel, I had to change strategies because the tone of it got a lot more serious, a lot more meaningful than the original underlying themes. As I discovered more in my research, I was like, I really need to back up, because if I don't get this in here in an effective way, my reader is going to miss out on a huge lesson that I, as an author, want them to get.
That's great. Yeah. Research is so key, especially, well, obviously in a story like this, it's even more important. But, I think this kind of genre is really interesting when you can turn it fictional instead of a historical sort of story, which can, they can get dry that way, right? But, turning it into a book based on true events allows you to take a little creative license, make it a little bit more interesting, and thus teach the reader something without them feeling like they're necessarily being taught by reading a textbook.
Right. And that was a challenge. That's where, Roland, you had mentioned it or asked that question earlier on. How do you make it entertainment? How do you do that? And for me, the magic was getting those personalities right. You've got to incorporate the elements of people's personalities that connect with your reader, with your reader. They have to connect, and not everybody connects with the same personality. So it can be helpful if you have various personalities in your book that play significant roles that people can connect with, but they're also realistic. I think in this type of book, this is a book based on, it's historical fiction. So it's not a superhero book. You can only be so so much creative liberties are allowed in something like this. But you're drawing upon your own past experiences. And that's where, I feel my background has helped me a lot, being in such a big adventure type person. I mean, I push the envelope in my life, in my personal life, and that helps me draw on those experiences that I can then incorporate into my book. I know what it's like to be in the seas of Alaska, in the fjords of Alaska, where I'm in 7-foot waves in a little 34-foot boat, and I think I might die. I've felt that, and so describing that is such a difficult thing to do if a lot of your experiences are very limited.
Absolutely. I mean, it's sometimes that's more difficult to do when you're writing about something historical, right? Is how do you you don't have that experience necessarily, that direct experience, but there are aspects that you can pull in, right?
That's
where,
right.
like you're saying, you didn't live in this time, you couldn't speak to a lot of the things, but in a situation like that, where with the boat and waves and all that stuff, like, what that feels like. So if you have a scene, you can add a lot of color and authenticity that way. So it's a really good technique for sure.
I'm fascinated to know how much your background as a Texan plays into that, because a lot of the Scots people who ended up in America went because they wanted to leave the English, they wanted to have there was very much a like self-determination, freedom, individuality. That was what appealed to me about moving to America 20 years ago. That's why I ended up here. But I think maybe how much of that do you think is the message that's coming across in your books?
Yeah, so it's just interesting you mentioned that. It is certainly one of the underlying themes of my book, and I think that's important for all authors to have. Have something meaningful in your book that your reader can get out beyond entertainment. And I think that allows you to go deeper into the characters' minds, deeper into their thoughts, deeper into the dialogue, because at the heart of that dialogue is something meaningful. And you're trying to convey that, right? And so how do you convey it in with the evolution of thought? And so as you're writing it in your book, so it does start with the underlying theme, like you're referring to, and that's literally this is a trilogy. My book's a trilogy. This is the first book of the trilogy. And so the underlying theme that really got me so interested in this was, as I did the research and realized that so many people from around so many different countries, not just Scotland, but in other countries as well, at the time in the 1640s, they were leaving their countries, a lot of them, to go to the colonies. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why would these people be willing, and what was the struggle they were fleeing from, or overcoming through getting on a boat and going over that treacherous journey across the sea to begin with, to start anew in a land that had no real structure or economy or anything like that? That would be like today if we say, okay, let's go to, who wants to go to Mars? Who's going to join me in the moon? We're going to start a colony in the moon. I mean, there has to be a struggle. There's more to that story. And so as you compare my background and to your question, Roland, being a Texan, being an American, we all share that story. We all have ancestors from some country that came over to the United States, other than Native Americans, but the vast majority of the United States population has ancestors from somewhere other than North America, right? And so many people will connect with that concept of reconnecting with the old world, right? Connecting the new world with the old world. And that's what a lot of these people wanted: opportunity. They wanted a better way of life. In many instances, sure, some were fleeing trouble, but trouble that they wanted to get away from, and wanted a better way of life away from that trouble. Some were pursuing opportunity. It's a mixed bag. Some wanted religion, freedom, religious freedom. So there's a mixed bag, but that Texas spirit, that independence, that individualism, that rugged individualism is something that's shared with the people that came over. And it's not just in Texas, it's there, across the United States. We all have that desire for freedom here and drive to secure it. But there's a connection there. And it's not that common thread appeals to a lot, most Americans, and in fact, I mentioned Native Americans. There's in the rest of the series, there'll be some Native Americans that become characters in the story and play a big part.
Now, do they come to Scotland, or do the Scots go to America?
Well, you have to pay attention. You have to read the book to find out. But it's a fast-paced environment. As Craig mentioned, you got to be careful to to not just make it a history lesson and, you know, make it so boring. This is entertainment that is allowing you to live, the reader to live history in a visceral sort of way. And they're going to feel the gut punches. They're going to feel the hope, the hopelessness, the motivators, the love, and the anger, the despair, the manipulations that go on, the treachery, the triumphs. That, you know, you take them through this emotional roller coaster, because that's what those people lived at that time. That's what they did. They lived those experiences. They were on that battlefield, dying left and right. You know, they were fleeing for their lives. They were, you know, they were doing that. And so letting that reader experience those same emotions connects today's world to the old world.
I think that's a really interesting point, because today, whatever your political opinion, we don't get into politics, but these are the times they will write history books about. And it's so interesting that we find ourselves in positions now where we have to make decisions, and we can look back on our ancestors and see, what did our ancestors do that we were proud of doing, and can we live up to the legacy that they left? And it's books like that, and it's historical fiction, I think, that really defines a lot of that. And, you know, when we think we have admirable characteristics, often we derive them from stories we heard about ancestors that we want to live up to.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. But to add to that, at the same time, people are flawed. You know, we are all human. We are all flawed. We all have flaws. None of us are perfect. We're not all Thor, you know, and Marvel characters, right? So also making
even Thor was you know, flawed.
Well, that's true. That's true. He drank too much beer in one of those stories, right? And he got a big old beer belly for a little while. But you know, revealing those flawed characteristics also helps the reader connect to these characters. You know, you can't have the perfect you know, character that never makes a mistake, that wins everything they do, that, you know, or do those people?
That would be DC, not Marvel, right?
Yeah, right. Or yeah, right.
Batman and Superman.
Good point.
So I'm interested about the writing process, because you hadn't never written a book before, right? And, you know, then all of a sudden it's dropped on you, hey, write this book called this. What kind of, you know, preparation did you do to write it? Or did you just sit down, write it, go through it and be like, okay, now I got to rewrite it? Did you, you know, research it out, read any books on writing, talk to anybody who's written a book? Like, how did you go about that?
Yeah, I did a combination of things. I went to some seminars about how to write, how to approach writing novels. You know, I did some of those. I talked to some author friends that I have that gave me a lot of advice. And then before I ever sat down to write this novel, I wrote a different novel, not one that I ever intended to publish. Just wrote one just to, you know, go through the process of writing a novel. I did not want to sit down and write this novel the first time. You know, this is a big one. This is a heavy lift. It's a complex, has lots of various parts that I'm trying to meld together on various levels, you know. So I did not want to attempt this from the get-go. So instead, I wrote a different novel that was less research, just more about writing and learning the process of writing, so that I could iron out my process, how I am going to write a story. And that one was only, I think it was 75,000 words, about 75, maybe 80,000 words. So I'm still, you know, a full-length story, but not a historical fiction. It was more like a thriller type novel, action / thriller. But it was just to get my process down. That's all. I never intended to publish it. Just wanted to write it.
Right. You know, that sounds like a really good idea. I was just thinking, like, I wrote 11 books before I had my first bestseller, and I go back and like read my first book, and I'm just like, you know, I don't know. And the sad thing is, a lot of people, when they discover you as an author, they're like, I'm going to read all his books starting from the first one, and It's
Yeah.
kind of like maybe that's not the best book to start from. So I quite like the approach you took.
Yeah.
So, and then I saw on your product page you have a publisher listed. So, are you with a publisher, or is that sort of your own?
So yeah, so what I did was I interviewed with with publishers and went to another seminar that actually had that posed that question: should you get a publisher or should you not? You know, and for my conclusion was I did not want to sign away all my rights to this story. This is my story, and I want this to be my story. I was not willing to sign away my rights. So I decided at the time, as I interviewed with a couple of different publishers, one wanted to publish and do the whole 9 yards, publish my story. She read it. She said, I loved it. I want to publish this. I want to be your publisher. Let's do it. And so I had to back her up and say, hey, I don't know if I'm interested in that. I'm just being honest, and so we had that discussion. And so what she was willing to do was act more like my consultant. She opened me up to all her editors, all her people that she works with as a publisher. I got to keep the rights. I paid, to her for her to be the consultant and work with me on this to bring it to with her publicist. I mean, with everybody, the copy editor, the developmental editor, the book cover person, whatever they're called. I can't remember. The
cover designer. Yeah.
So many people that I'm dealing with through her. It's difficult to keep track of the real positions there. But I worked with everybody to bring it to the market now, and I'm working with a publicist, her publicist now that she's connected me with, and so I think, I'm open to that long term, but I'm a businessman. Okay. This is at the heart of what that decision came down to me is this. It's just strictly business. As a budding author, unless you have the home run, Harry Potter or something like that, right? You don't have much leverage to negotiate with if
Right.
you were going to do something. And so I can't expect a good deal for myself necessarily if I haven't proven that I have something to bring to the table of value. And so for me, my decision was pretty clear. I am going to maintain my rights and not to hand them over to a publisher on this first novel. And let's see how this goes. If I do well with this novel and it penetrates the market, because that's difficult to do in today's world. If it shows some potential,
Absolutely.
then I'm open to talking about that, more. But as it stands now, I don't know. I don't see that I'm going to change that. But I mean, I'm not going to say never. I'm always open to a conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, it is very difficult
yeah.
to get traction when you are a new author, and you really do need to do some sort of marketing and advertising, because at this point, so many new books are published every single day that you're blowing in the wind. Nobody knows you're out there unless you make it known. I mean, it's great. So you have a publicist, but do you have any other plans for how you want to market and advertise this book?
Yeah, we're working through those plans. I mean, I've got I would call it a complex marketing plan. We're going through all the details of that right now as far as bringing it to market. Obviously, we're getting the reviews. First step, the review copies done. So we're sending those copies out to get a bunch of reviews, and of course that will be between now and when we release the book, to the public, so that we can promote it. There's a lot of social media type campaigns that we're just getting launched off and going, like literally right now. We just formed my author page on Facebook and all my social media stuff. I mean, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, so we really made it all go live, along with my website, where you can learn more about the book and stay in tune with the journey between now and in book 3, the whole journey. I mean, we're gonna take all of our podcasts that we participate in. We're gonna put it up on there. We'll do an email. We have an email system that's gonna take care of emailing it out, and with people that want to stay in tune with the more historical details, like facts, history versus book, right? Actual history versus what the book said. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of these motivators, because there are a lot of people that are interested in the history of
sure.
in Scotland in particular, and how it evolved. So doing the things that keep people interested, not just in your story, but in the subject matter. And then, promoting that. And so going a little bit deeper than just the entertainment side of the story, to help those people connect and find, have a stake in that story, basically. They take an interest and want to find out more, and you just build on that. And there's a lot of other things, but I mean, we have a complex strategy for sure.
Yeah, listen, that sounds like a really good plan. I love the idea that, since you're new, you would have a lot of trouble getting traction if you were to say, here's my new novel, and it's about the idea that you're going after people that like the subject matter, because those people already exist. Those groups already exist.
Yeah.
And, they're the first places you should look for the readers of your novel. And I think that that's a great strategy. And I think that's something that a lot of authors should look at when they're publishing. It's not just, hey, I got a new novel, and it's great. You look for, and they put it up on Facebook, they put it up on social just blindly, but it's those targeted approaches of finding who would really want to read this book, not
right.
just readers of historical fiction, people that like this type of subject. Yeah,
absolutely. So one thing I didn't mention, is we have more of a two-tier level of targeting strategy for the social media and the marketing side of this. So of course you have to have the broad, Amazon and everybody, come on, come all, take a look at this, and let's hopefully get some traction at a broader level. But at the micro level, so for example, there are, in my book, as it relates to my book, and I think every historical fiction author can find this equivalent for their subject matter, but there are groups like, there's all these, historical, or clan associations, right? Like Scottish clan associations. You have in this case, there's a Clan MacDonald, there's sects, SECTS of each one, right? And so the little splinter groups that form, there's like in Clan Lammet, there's a Clan Lammet Society of North America. There's one over in Scotland. There's one in Australia. So there's all these different groups all around the world interested in this subject matter. So that's just one clan. There's, Clan MacDonald has the same thing all over the world, in Ireland as well. Their big part of their clan went down into Ireland. And so of your clan, Roland. And so then you also have like general Scottish heritage organizations, right? And you can focus those. You can do geopolitical marketing on a boundary for the Scottish Highland Games in certain areas that are happening over a given weekend. And you can target that stuff. So through technology, there's all kinds of ability to micro target in people or groups of people that are going to be interested in that subject matter, which is like putting gas on a fire, right? That's like putting gasoline on a fire. If you're gaining traction and you can do that, then hopefully, they start connecting a lot of dots and telling people about it, and it just helps it gain a lot of traction.
That's absolutely right. That's the amazing thing about publishing as it is, because you now, instead of only being able to reach people in bookshops, you can reach people all over the world. And you're right. If you can find someone that your book is just perfect for, then you don't need to appeal to everyone. You just appeal to those people.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any early feedback? Have you sent it out to beta readers or test readers?
Yeah. So I have. So I've gotten two, I would call it two buckets of feedback. So yeah, I have the personal, or I say three buckets now, but two buckets would be like the test readers, which would be what I believe would be my target audience in the United States of America. Okay. People that I think would be interested in this type of book. And so I gave them the third copy, the third version, my final rough version. This was before it was even edited and everything. And without exception, every single one of them, I had about 9, I think it was 9 readers that I sent the whole novel to. They loved it. They were in love with the story. They thought it was amazing, that it was deep and connected with it. And it was engaging the entire time. It didn't get to that slow historical, blah that you're trying to avoid. But the entertainment side did its job. Clearly I needed, editing, and this was before editing, like I said. So I needed a lot of touch up, but I made it clear that, hey, this is unedited. And so that's when I knew I had a story. I had something real here, and that is valuable, that people are going to enjoy. And then I moved forward with the rest of the editing process. And then once it was edited, the first pass, on the copy editing side, which was right before so I did, to back up, the developmental editor side did occur before I did my test readers. So I did my draft before I gave it to my test readers. I gave it to the developmental editor for the final. This was my final, after my final third draft. So
right.
got it under control there. Then the test readers gave me their feedback. Then I give it to the copy editor, and then I circulate it again, in some instances to the same readers. Some of them were the same readers, but some were new beta readers, and they all, the feedback was really good. And so that was my process, Craig. That's how we did it.
I think you did it the right way.
Well, time will tell. I'm not convinced yet until we get get it published and, see what happens, how the market responds to it.
Now, unfortunately, it looks like we're approaching the top of the hour. So that's maybe you could very quickly go over like some of the ideas that you've had for marketing that perhaps are not, that stem from your entrepreneurial background, because you've been successful in different types of business before. So what lessons do you think you bring to the table with that maybe other first-time authors don't have?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that is how I approached writing this novel. I took how I approached the rest of my life, and I applied it to writing this first novel. And it starts off, for me, and everybody's different, and you got to figure out what works for you, right? But for me, it starts off with, I feel like in life, if you're going to be successful in today's world as an author or anything else, you have to be able to compete literally at an Olympic level. You basically have to bring the very best you can do every day, because that is the day that the Olympics take place, right? When we're writing a novel, it's every day. Or when you're in business, it's every day. You make one mistake any given day, you're going down, right? Well, for the Olympics, it's just on game day, right? But before that, they're bringing that same mindset. They're training their body and minds to focus and perform at that same level that they perform at on game day all the days before that. And so what does that mean to me? It starts off with, I gotta have a good lifestyle choice. If I'm dragging, if I don't have energy, if I am distracted by all these different things going on in this world, I can't produce. I can't, and that's in the business world or as an author. So I one thing I always believe in is good sleep. I get a lot of sleep. I go to bed. If I'm in bed by 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I've got a big smile on my face and I'm ready to drink a cup of coffee in the morning. I also believe that you have to eat well. You know, good quality food. You know, the convenience food, it's just filling your belly, but it's not giving you the fundamental energy that you need, in my view. And so those are two big things. And then key to getting good rest and feeling energetic is exercise, both physically, but also mentally. I have found over time, you know, sometimes I didn't sleep well and I'm like, well, why not? Well, you know, I sat in a chair all day. I used my mind, but I didn't use any energy physically. And so there it is. My body's not tired, but my mind is, and I can't sleep. So come and get in tune with your body and listen to it and understand what you need to do to feel good every day. Because if you don't feel good, you cannot produce. That's one of the, I think, the first things. And then beyond that, it's just work ethic, prioritization. Be intentional about how you spend your time every day. In today's world, you know, your phone rings nonstop. Next thing you know, the world is telling you how you spend your time. It is dictating how you spend your entire day. You're just reacting to the things butting into your life. Learn how to separate that and push that back. Be intentional about how you spend your time. You make the decision. I am not going to answer the phone. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that, you know, or make exceptions where you need to make exceptions, but be more intentional about blocking out that area you need to devote the time to achieving that goal. I think is critical. I think you have to build a habit, make it consistent. You do it every day. It becomes habitual. It becomes easier. It gets second nature. And next thing you know, you're doing that every day and you are moving mountains. You know, you're moving mountains. So I think those are just some things that I do, that I do every day, blocking and tackling, you know, to make sure that I take a step forward every day. I keep a list. Every day I wake up with a plan. You know, this is what I'm doing today. I literally have a plan every day of my goals. And I'm trying to, when I'm crossing out things on that list, I am moving forward. You know, it's things like that, you know.
I think that's great advice. Well, so before we wrap things up, Craig, did you have any final advice before I ask Ben to let everyone know where they can find out more about his book?
No, listen, I think that end was great advice. I do the same thing with lists, but that for me is more, I have a terrible memory and total ADHD, so I need the list. But I absolutely think that they are essential for everyone. So it really does sound like, you know, it might be your first novel, but it almost sounds like you figured this all out already. So thanks for coming on and sharing your process with everybody.
No, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys having me on your show. I appreciate that. And, you know, I realize I'm a new author at this, but hopefully there's just some tidbits people can take away from and apply to their life in general or as an author, and they felt that it was worth their time.
Well, where can people find out more about you and more about your book?
Yeah, I love that question. It's benlemanauthor.com, and that's BenLeman author.com. That's my website, and from there you can learn more about the book and stay in touch with everything.
Well, we will be sure to leave a link down to that in the description of this video. So if you are excited about everything Ben has shared with us today, make sure you scroll down there and check it out. And as you go past, you will see that big empty comment section. So make sure you leave Ben a comment and let him know how much you appreciated everything he shared with us today. While you're down there, if you haven't already, there's that subscribe button, that like button, that little bell icon that you can click to get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a brand new episode of Fully Booked coming next week. So until then, cheerio.